One person's luxury is another's essential. 80% of the pre-existing consumer research I've seen before, it's utterly expected. Your competitors are looking at exactly the same data.
Hello, I'm Jane Hovey, a partner at Vivaldi, a strategic consulting firm focused on creating transformational growth for business and brands. I'm joined today by Lee Powney, a senior partner at Vivaldi, to talk about how businesses can grow and succeed throughout times of economic crisis. To give you a bit of background on Lee, he's worked with some incredible clients over the last 2 decades. Whether it's Vodafone, Microsoft, Coca-Cola, AB InBev, Samsung, American Express and Marriott, he's really worked with some top brands. Lee, who's your favourite client?
It's an unfair question, Jane. I think obviously work with a range of different clients, but it's always very rewarding to work with smaller, newer, high growth businesses. So in the last 12 months, I've really enjoyed working with Current, who are a neobank, fintech in the US. Great leadership, great vision, a lot of great people doing really wonderful work there, so it's been great. But equally, you know, working with brands like Bud Light on brand strategy and product innovation, it's a privilege. It's a lot of fun.
You've observed a lot of trends around the recession in 2007, 2008.
Yep.
Obviously, we're about to enter another period of recession. How does what we're seeing today compare with that time?
That's a good question. There are fundamental differences, and some of those differences are a little bit more worrying, I'd say. Obviously, we're all very conscious of the inflationary pressures that we're seeing at the moment. But a lot of this is sort of in addition to things that have been happening over the last 10, 12 years anyway. There has been increasing income wealth disparity in Western society. There is and has been a housing affordability crisis, which doesn't seem to be stopping. And now we have decreasing wages in terms of real terms. So I think where we're heading is to a situation where I think middle classes in this recession are going to be hit significantly harder than they were in 2008, I think. And I think for a lot of consumer brands, that would be sending out some significant alarm bells. I think it's I guess from a monetary policy and fiscal perspective, it's a bit of a wicked problem, right? It really is, and that just pours fuel on the flames, I think, of worry and concern, because the path through is not quite as clear, maybe, as the previous recession.
That's interesting to hear. Now, the world has changed a lot since 2008. We've got hybrid working, we've got remote working more, we've got how people are feeling since the pandemic. What are the key things that we should be looking at?
Yeah, well, I actually think that's probably the good news story in a way, that we've all been through our own personal experiments, right, for the last 2 years. And what we can see time and time again when we're conducting consumer research across a range of different clients and a range of different projects is some pretty consistent changes in attitudes, expectations, preferences from a consumer perspective. I mean, you can see that the role of the home itself has changed. It's taken on a much more central role. It's a deeper construct than it was previously. It's actually it's our primary place now that we orchestrate our interactions with the outside world. I think there's clearly been a growing appreciation of our mental well-being. There has been, for many people, a reappraisal of what matters in life, their ambitions and their value system, a quest for balance and quality of life. I think also what we've seen is a drive to demarcate time in the day. When we were always out, we were always commuting, we were always out in the office, the city. That's a very rich tapestry, a lot of different experiences every single day. But time in that home context, it needs marking. People need moments. People need rituals. We've seen that quite a lot, actually, the way people are breaking up time throughout the day.
Do you think there's a frustration with bureaucracy and governments off the back of some of the rules people had, and how are people approaching those?
Absolutely. I think that new home context that I talked about, there's a lot of services piling into that new context. And what I mean by that is that people are just not willing to feel that they're passengers on somebody else's system anymore, whether it be a government bureaucracy or a particularly effortful customer experience interaction. We're looking more and more to take control and hack around those systems. I think you can see quite a lot of sort of doctor on demand services and health on demand services are entering the home now as a great example of that.
You're suggesting businesses grow despite double-digit inflation.
Yep.
People's incomes have gone down. There's forecasts of a global recession. There's, resources are tight as well with what you can actually find in the supermarket.
Yep.
And you're suggesting that businesses can grow in these difficult times.
I'm suggesting some businesses can grow. Let me be very clear on this issue. There are a lot of commentators in the business and marketing press, pretty much the same commentators that were around in 2008, firing out these pearls of wisdom, these generic statements that it's the right time to grow, this is the right time to increase marketing budgets, don't stop innovating, invest in digital, invest in this, invest in that. And they're offering the same wafer-thin advice today. And I find that particularly frustrating because it seems incredibly naive in many ways. Whether you can grow and whether you should grow at this point in time is a decision made only after a clinical evaluation of your business and the situation your business finds itself in. However, some businesses are in the right position at the right time to continue their investment in growth initiatives.
Interesting. So clients come to us.
Yep.
How do we help them navigate whether they can and should grow?
There's a lot of factors. I mean, there's too many factors to list today, but some of the top ones. Cost leadership. It's very tempting in this environment for cost-based decisions to be the dominant thought for executive teams. And it's also very easy to fall into the trap to assume that the customer or the consumer will act in a perfectly rational economic mindset in terms of trading down and trading off various purchases. One person's luxury is another's essential, and vice versa. People's approach to how they maintain their spend with you during a recession is entirely situational, just dependent upon that segment, that consumer, and their relationship with your brand. Now, with those two factors in mind, there is 0 point really chasing a price leadership strategy if you don't have cost leadership. That's almost preordained death spiral, which means you really need to look at supporting and accentuating the value-added components of your proposition to consumers or customers that can support a price premium of some description. Account management, warranty, after-sales care, all this kind of stuff. Bolt-ons, bundled offers that come with the proposition. These are things that can support a price premium. Other factors that I think you need to really look at. I think you need to look at the core competencies of your business. Are these fully leveraged? Can we reapply these core competencies to adjacent sectors or other markets, for example? I think also new markets in terms of new geographies that are underserved or unserved by your existing services. Another great example. we like to talk about zero distance customer relationships a lot at Vivaldi, because I think what we really mean by that is embracing digital transformation, most typified by platform businesses, where you can get real-time indications of changes in behaviour during this economic period, because you literally do have zero distance between you and your customer and their preferences. You have a learning engine. And I think that's some of the advantages people like Amazon have naturally. Lastly, I think you have to look at the core customer, and you have to be able to say, you have to be able to understand that core customer in terms of their wider lifestyle outside of just their interactions with you in the category you happen to be in at the moment. You then have to look at that through the lens of your brand, preferably I think your brand purpose, and say, well, how else can we add value to that core consumer? Where do we have the right to add additional value, to extend into?
So that's really interesting. One point to touch on that I think makes Vivaldi's approach different and coming up with more innovative solutions is our theory of strategy beyond the category. Could you expand on that somewhat?
Yeah, sure. So all that really means is that you decouple your organisation from the category that you're currently operating in. That doesn't mean you stop doing what you're doing. What it means is that if you have a really strong sense of brand, you have a really strong brand purpose, it means that the collective orientation of the business is focused on that end result. It is not necessarily focused entirely on the current how or the current what, in other words, the current business model. If you can decouple the mindset, if you have that very strong brand purpose, you can look at a field of play, all those different things that you could choose to do and have the right to do because of that brand purpose. Now, when you do that, you can have a look at all those post-COVID effects where we talked about changes in the structural landscape of demand, new opportunities opening up across lots of different sectors. Well, if we understand that brand purpose, we have a much better lens upon which to decide where can we innovate, where can we extend into, what new opportunities do we have the right to exploit.
When we look at strategies in that way,
Yep.
I think it transforms how you need to look at the customer. So what does that mean for how businesses and brands should approach their understanding of the customer to really take advantage of that opportunity?
That's a great question. I would say I'm going to go a little bit rogue here. Honestly, 80% of the pre-existing consumer research I see that clients have, I've seen before. It's utterly expected. And I think you've just got to say, look, if you have a degree of vertical expertise, right, you've been working in a particular industry for a while, there's a pattern, there's a common body of insights that a lot of clients believe are unique to them, but the reality is your competitors are looking at exactly the same data. And I think that's primarily driven by the fact that most research on a consumer is conducted through the lens of a category, right? So if what we want to know is all those wonderful insights around preferences, key drivers, consideration criteria on my category, that's all I understand about the consumer. But we're moving into a world where we have a tremendous opportunity. We were just talking about how COVID has changed people, how it's ruptured some established norms, right? And it's opened up new preferences, new needs, new desires. How do I tap into those if all I understand about the consumer is their attitude and preferences towards my category? I need to look at the whole consumer. We need to widen the lens on the consumer. We need to understand the consumer in their full domains that they exist in, outside of just simply what I'm trying to sell to them at this point in time.
So is that about adding depth to the relationship with the customer, would you say? And is that about purpose versus positioning as you're kind of moving on to those deeper relationships?
I think the key opportunity when it comes to the core customer and figuring out whether now is the right time, or in just formulating a growth strategy, is to say, if I have a strong brand purpose, where can that take me in a new field of play outside of my current category? We have this opportunity. The walls of received wisdom of how to compete and deliver value in certain categories have cracked because of these changing perceptions and attitudes that consumers now have. But how do you understand where to tackle those opportunities? Where are the opportunities for your business? It's through the lens of your brand purpose, right? So we can extend into those new opportunities, but we only know where to extend if we understand more about our core customer. We need to understand how that core customer lives across all those domains of their life. Now, there's a potential to deepen the relationship, but you can't deepen the relationship if all you know about your core customer is purely their preferences for your category.
Is there a challenge, though, that sometimes when people are talking about purpose, it's just propaganda and not really kind of embedded in the organisation?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So I think brand purpose is can be incredibly powerful strategy to use in an organisation, but it can also be incredibly corrosive. If your purpose is not connected to your strategy and your execution, it is propaganda. It's a corporate mission dressed up with some virtuous sound bites. Now, I'm somewhat damning and somewhat sympathetic. A lot of consulting partners or agencies, they won't necessarily be able to wrap their arms around a full global corporate strategy or even have access to the conversations to shape that strategy. You want a purpose? Sure, have a purpose. But ultimately, from an employee, from a customer, from a strategic stakeholder perspective, if you're not delivering on that purpose, it is synthetic and it is corrosive.
There's a lot said about purpose, and it doesn't always run deep and wide within an organisation. What's the litmus test for whether purpose is actually working for you?
So we have some criteria that we use to be able to assess the strength of a proposed purpose, or whether even the conditions are there to be able to use purpose as a valid strategy. The first one is role, which is really, can you articulate what the world is going to look like without you as an organisation, and what it could look like with you as an organisation. The next one is value, and that really is about how realistic is it that you're going to be seen as a viable contributor to that change. The next one is truth, and truth is really, really important. How realistic is it that this purpose is actually going to direct strategy? And the last one is gravity. Do people want to get involved? Do people want to contribute? Do employees, customers, external strategic stakeholders, is it motivating? Do they want to be part of it? Do they want to come on that journey?
It's interesting to talk about taking an organisation on that journey. And we both know from our careers that strategy to actual action and bringing it to life can be a real challenge.
Yep.
There's many key factors there. I think culture is a really important one. What have you seen going on, and particularly when you're trying to motivate a team who might themselves be suffering during a recession?
I think you've hit on a really important point. Culture, or more specifically mindset, the organisation's mindset of growth, the climate. What's it like in there on issues of growth? So when we're taking a client through a growth transformation program, one of the first things we need to understand is that climate. And there are, I say this with a great degree of confidence, there are some factors that keep occurring. They keep coming up from the work that we do as pretty consistent determining factors of a healthy, positive environment around exploring growth and exploiting growth opportunities. The first one I think is something that a lot of organisations, large organisations, struggle with. It's what we call compression. And what that means is that regardless of how large the organisation is or how many layers the organisation has, to what degree can leadership shrink that? to what degree can they create a sense of proximity to issues of growth, to conversations of growth. Bracken Darrell, CEO of Logitech, is an absolute master at this. He can pick up on small points, potentially small points of new things that the organisation is doing and celebrate them publicly with a complete disregard for hierarchy. That creates a sense of closeness to the issue of growth. I was working with a telco client a few years back, and the innovation team had spent about 3 weeks to a month preparing for their annual innovation showcase. And the CEO appeared, not necessarily sure what was expected of him in that meeting, walked around the room, looked at sort of PowerPoints that had been printed out and pictures put up on the wall, nodded his head, carry on. Now, there's a lot that went wrong there, but I've seen it countless times. It's a bit of innovation theatre, and it feels very distant. And how important are these issues of growth to the organisation if we get 45 minutes of semi-attentive conversation a year with the CEO? I think that says a lot, and it sets a tone for issues of growth. The next one is process. All large organisations have bonkers processes. I mean, we all know this. It is just the nature of the beast. But the question is, to what degree do staff, employees feel that they can challenge a process and change a process? That's really important, that they're able to be contributors to the improvement of an organisation rather than be supplicants or, in some cases, victims of these insane processes or contradictory processes. The next one, I think, is about belief. And belief is a byproduct of how the organisation has behaved historically. And belief either expands or contracts an organisation's sensitivity to new opportunities around growth, because it's really about that felt belief system of, will my company, will my organisation actually act on this opportunity? Will they celebrate new news? Will they celebrate new news that might be threatening to the existing convention of how we deliver value? Or will it be dismissed out of hand? And that translates a lot of the time into people in an organisation editing insights that might be a little bit too sharp or too provocative, or almost immediately screening out new product ideas that just too much for us, or even worse, we wouldn't know what to do with that. Now, that's quite a sad state of affairs, but it's present in more organisations than we would want it to be. So those are just some of the factors that occur and the top of mind of how we would look at the mindset of an organisation.
That's really interesting as well in the context of culture strangling experimentation.
Massively,
and stopping people actually doing what they need to do, particularly in tight times where you need to make the right.
Absolutely. And I think it's most likely that most people are going to be working in a more constrained environment, which actually means that anything in terms of investments you've made in innovation is going to have to work harder than it did prior to the recession. So how many times have you seen a radical innovation or a mildly disruptive concept be asked an unanswerable question? What's the revenue projection for the next 3 years on this concept? I don't know. It doesn't exist yet. We've tested this concept along other concepts. It's got high likability from consumers, but low believability. Well, of course it does. It doesn't exist yet, and it's completely outside of the frame of reference of consumers. No, it's fine. We'll go with highly liked and highly familiar concepts, and then we'll be surprised 12 months later why actually we've got such high NPD failure rates. Experimentation is key because it allows us to A, know what questions we really need to ask, and B, we can learn rapidly at relatively low risk.
So there's lots of interweaving threads there. So we've talked about purpose, we've talked about culture, and those threads working together surely need to kind of be really meaningful to help brands grow in this time and not be shallow.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think to sort of summarize the points we've been talking about, focusing on your core customer, widening the lens or the aperture of your understanding of that customer, embracing the new opportunities that post-COVID has really provided in terms of changes in attitudes and behaviours, and figuring out where you can extend as a result of that brand purpose, the kind of key tenets of a successful growth strategy, I think. But you have to, going back to the first thing I think we talked about, you have to take a very clinical view of your business's current situation before deciding on a path of growth.
Lee, it's been a pleasure talking to you. So many insights, and despite these hard times coming, it's really exciting to look at how we can work as an organisation, as a firm, to put these into practice for businesses, to help them grow and even thrive in these difficult times. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Jane.
If you've enjoyed today as much as I have, please follow us on our social channels or go to vivaldigroup.com.